Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Patient First Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Laskin. As always, I'm excited that you're here. And also, I'm really excited. We have a great guest today. Justin Strong is the founder and CEO of Room 118, a data-driven dental research and marketing agency helping high-growth practices scale with precision. With 25 years of experience, including leadership roles at Fortune 100 companies, high growth tech startups, he created the Dental Marketing Index to benchmark predictable performance across thousands of dental practices, now leading the 2025 edition. Justin has restructured the index around three core pillars: market visibility, prospect conversion, and case acceptance and loyalty. Known for a strategic and analytic approach, he turns complex industry data into clear, actionable strategies that drive patient acquisition, revenue growth, and long-term success. Justin, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Dr. Laskin, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, obviously, we both love swimming in the same pool of data, right? It's crucial. It's the subject of my last book, not my next one, but my last one, Dental Disorder, about the importance of having data about our patients so that we can diagnose and treat them. And what I know about you is that you love using data in a similar way to help drive practice growth, if I'm correct. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I think it's a critical topic. I think it's one of those things where data as a thing is who hasn't heard data driven for the last umpteen years. Everybody's heard that idea, but I think actually having data permeate a dental practice in terms of practical ideas on how I should change this or what I should do here, maybe that's not as common as at least you and I would think it should be. I think data in this modern age is as much information as there is out there. Not using it would be like you have an x-ray machine. You can actually look what's going on inside of a patient's tooth, inside their jaw, and their overall facial anatomy. And just saying, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to make a diagnosis just based on what I can see externally. You could do that and maybe you'd have some success, but by and large, you're never going to compete with just having good information to make good decisions. In the same way that you have your patient's best interests at heart when you're looking at information to make decisions, I think data for your practice is equally important. And it's just one of those things that as a practice owner, yes, you have to balance a lot of stuff. You're a clinician first and operations and all of this and that. But starting to lean into this notion of I'm going to use data to make decisions is really profoundly impactful to your practice.
I Yeah, I agree with you. And I think one of the reasons why people's eyes glaze over when they hear about data driven and like you point out, people, dental practices or DSOs, or it's overwhelming, right? Because most
Yeah.
data dashboards are overwhelming, right? If you open up like the average dental dashboard, it's going to have a whole bunch of crap that nobody cares about. Let's just be real, right? And so we've created a dashboard called Insights where we're trying to focus on the few key KPIs that matter. And I think that's different, particularly from a marketing perspective for every practice, right? If you do a lot of sleep dentistry, your marketing metrics will be different than somebody that does a lot of implants, more than likely. Now, obviously there'll be some crossover, but can you talk a little bit about how you hone in on, because I think when you talk about data, it just seems like a boring, dry topic. But if you take a
Yeah.
bullet, like if you take a data point that every dentist is probably gonna go, "Oh, I probably want to know that." They'll go, "Yeah, that makes a lot of sense." So can you highlight maybe one or two of those?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's, pardon me, got a little something in my throat. So let's step back and take a look at part of our research is something called the keyword codex. And for your listeners, basically, this is a list of hundreds of thousands of key search terms that folks type into Google, primarily, sometimes Bing and other platforms. And they're doing that because they're researching symptoms, maybe they're researching treatment options, they're trying to find a dental practice, something like that. We look at that list for a couple of reasons, but it's really important to us to understand what your prospective patients are thinking, what they value, and one of the most profound things that came out of that research actually came out of the first edition of the Dental Marketing Index 2 years ago. We started to look at, for example, in the taxonomy for that index, we looked at the word dentist, and then we looked at that word with what we call an intent modifier, the word near me. So dentist and then dentist near me. And we went back to 2010 in that original set of data. And what we found was since 2010, and this went to about 2022 for this data set, what we saw was a steady increase in the overall traffic for the term dentist. It outpaced human population, so it wasn't just there was more people, so there's more searches. It was indicative of the fact that people are searching more often. That was interesting. And it went from something like a million to like 1.7 million searches per month on average over that 12-year period. When we looked at the term dentist near me, that term went from a few hundred searches a month in 2010 to something like 2 million plus in the same time frame. And so when you plot that on a graph, dentist has this very steady increase. And you see this massive spike in search behavior for the word dentist near me. And we see that today across the board. And the reason that matters to a practice owner is what does that say? What does that data point say about what your prospective patients value? The near me phrase is something we call a proximity intent modifier. And it's really just somebody saying, I value convenience. Really, I'm not interested in going long distance for the best dental care, at least maybe for the purposes of this search. So when we look at all of those keyword search terms across the board, we see these interesting fluctuations in do they value affordability? Do they value private insurance, public insurance? Are they looking for membership plans? Are they interested in very specific types of procedures? Are they trying to find elective procedures? How much do they value cosmetic dentistry versus, say, more traditional clinical? So on and so forth. And I think right now, if you could sit down and see a list in your local area, if you own a practice in Minneapolis or you own one in Jacksonville or wherever you're at, if you could sit down and say, okay, these are the types of things people in my neighborhood are searching on, that starts to help you start to make decisions about what sort of patient experience you want to drive. Are they strictly, and I've got some clients who have this in their focus, are they strictly motivated by price? Maybe your practice is very austere and you give the most inexpensive care you can because that's what your market values. And then I've got other practices that are in very affluent areas. That's not what their market is interested in. And so they make decisions about everything from like where are we going to physically locate our offices to how much money are we going to spend on the next build out to what type of treatment options are we going to offer, do we want to do PPO and things like that. A lot of those decisions have just been made not necessarily on gut instinct, but basically this is what we've done, so we're going to make decisions that way. What if you could look at what your prospective patients are actually valuing? That's why I think data around this one component of the research actually matters to your audience.
That's great. It's just fantastic information. I when I have people on the podcast and I ask questions, the vast majority of the time it's for my own intellectual curiosity. So in 100% service of my own intellectual curiosity, I am thinking of what you said was very valuable, and I think of it as what's the bait you're going to put on the hook to get
Yeah.
the new patient in the door. I've been thinking a lot about this because we launch a lot of new products here and with other
Mhm.
companies that I work with. And what's your perspective on that? The bait on the hook versus creating your own market that you're going to go after. So when you mentioned, for example, dental membership plans, right? The some patients may not know that exists as an option. So they're probably not searching Google for that, but maybe it's an affordability piece. But I don't really have a coherent question other than I'd love to get your perspective on for the dental practice who's looking to bring in new patients. How much of this should they be going after what people are looking for versus proactively messaging something that people may want if they knew it?
Yeah, it's such a critical question because it's so in the realm to me this is a question that's rooted in brand positioning. Your practice is a brand, that brand has mind share within your existing patients and ideally those that are considering to take you on as their provider. Do I want to position the brand to be towards that affluent crowd or towards a more austere environment or something else? As a rule, I've always told clients, and this goes beyond dental, this goes back to my days in big tech and things like that when we're launching a tech company and we try to push this notion of you need to decide what your brand is to be authentic because nobody likes a manufactured brand. Nobody, it just doesn't feel right. And this is one of the challenges I think that DSOs face when they try to corporatize practices, they have a lot of advantages when they do that. But one of the things that they, I think, struggle with is how do you have an authentic brand? So that's intention, this notion of an authentic brand, who you are just organically, the practice you want to be, versus what does the market actually want? How do you actually value that? And one of the things we do when we engage with practices is first we look at the local market. We do demographic analysis. We actually have a whole model that does this for us, but we look at what is the age distribution of your practice? What's the fertility rate? What's educational attainment look like? What's the median household income? What's poverty rates? We build an entire demographic model that then flows to a demand model. So you could say, okay, based on the demographics of this local neighborhood, when we compare what we see nationally, we would expect to see, for example, more preference for implants versus, say, traditional prosthodontics, more preference for preventative care than restorative care because they have money, they're going to see their dentist regularly. And so your practice maybe is going to be more focused on that. We can see preference for public insurance or emergent care where they have to pay out of pocket versus no, they're really willing to pay more money under a fee for service model that focuses on really high end care that's not concerned with private insurance. We can see all of those things so they can answer the basic question of well, this is where my brand wants to be focused on. Does the market support that? And in most cases, the answer is yes. And in some cases, it's not. So it's a question of how do you tweak your brand positioning to make an informed decision about how you want to behave within your market. And to us, this is if you go for a walk in the woods and it's completely dark outside, that's what most practices are doing today to answer that question. We're saying turn on the lights, be able to see what's going on around you so you can know how to get to where you want to go. And data is just absolutely critical. And data that's accessible is critical for practice owners to be able to make those decisions.
I totally agree. And so I say on this podcast pretty regularly that there's the three biggest charlatans in dentistry. Number one is dental insurance, and closely behind them now, I believe two and three are dental marketing companies and consultants. And that doesn't mean that obviously you know how to market through data. And I think that's really one of the main differentiators. You're not just like saying, hey, make a beautiful website and people are going to come find you. You're like using data to drive people. I want to challenge you on one thing you said though, because you said that DSOs don't have the opportunity to have this sort of authentic brand. If I'm going to read, and I would disagree. I think they're not taking the opportunity that they have. I think it's pretty. I think that they have as probably a better opportunity to have this strong brand than an individual
Yeah.
practice that's everybody's just trying to get Betty Jones's implant seated today versus a DSO that has a whole marketing support team. They just suck at it. Let's just call it out, right? I can't even that's not true. That's not true of all. I can think of a couple. I won't say their names here, but there's a couple that are do a pretty good job of it. But
Yeah.
overall, the industry is just bad at developing brand awareness in a way that gives a positive feeling about your brand. Now, there's a couple that are just crushing it now that I'm thinking about it. But A, do you agree with that? And B, what would your advice to a DS? Because there's a lot of DSOs that listeners that
Yeah.
DSO leaders that listen to this. What would your advice be? Other than hire
Well,
room
and
118, obviously.
yeah, yeah, that's the easy plug right there. I think it's a fascinating thing. So when I look at what's going on inside most DSOs, when I go back in my career, I spent some time doing leading strategy for marketing at an agency on behalf of a very large tech company that everybody on this podcast has heard of. And they spent, I recall, and I gotta be careful what I share here, they spent $50 million to change their logo, literally $50 million to change their logo. It had no appreciable impact on brand loyalty or recognition or any other metric that they measured. DSOs, I think, are in a similar boat structurally. I agree with your premise. It's not that they can't, it's that maybe they don't. But the disadvantage I think a DSO has is, and again, I'm speaking from my own experience and I'm going back to like painful memories of being in the trenches with these teams of people. It's hard to be authentic to a brand when you can't control it. When
Mhm.
you're like a small stakeholder and you might be the person that's writing copy or the person that's designing the website, or you're doing other things that manifest the brand in ways that your audience most appreciates, but they're either not totally bought into the brand or they just more likely don't really fully get the brand. in the same way that a practice owner that owns their own practice could. Now, some of our most, I don't want to impugn the performance of DSOs. They're more interested in what we do than practice owners are, because they really are data centric much more so than practice owners, because they have the infrastructure and they have the decision making capacity to do things with it. But I think they face an inherent challenge for grabbing onto and maintaining that authenticity. It's not that they can't do it. It is a challenge, though. It's hard to be, it's hard to brand by committee, I guess, is maybe my point. I think that they're getting better at it. I also think the industry as a whole is getting better at it. But I think that progress that's happening maybe isn't keeping pace with other industries outside of dental, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would summarize what you just said as weak leadership. That's what it comes down to.
You,
Because
you said it. I didn't
if you
say
have,
it.
I said it. No, you didn't say it.
Yeah.
I summarized it that way. Because if you have a strong leader that can guide that vision, right? Because that's what
Yeah.
leadership is: vision and and basically banging the drum of where we're headed. And if you can
Yeah.
have that sort of strong brand, that's what strong brands have that weak brands don't have. Now, if you have two people, it's pretty easy to be aligned. If you have 1,000 people, you have to be a much stronger leader. So the difference, in my mind, between having a strong brand and a weak brand in dentistry really comes down to leadership. And and I've been in the trenches on a DSO, right? And I would certainly mirror that weak leadership, in the ones that I've been in, and not the ones I've worked with, because now we work with a lot of DSOs and some have just
Yeah.
phenomenal leadership, phenomenal brands, but the one that I've been in the leadership team of, not so much. And by the way, the data that drove that business, I believed was the wrong data. And I've been looking at things like something that a hygiene in a hygiene practice, the hygiene side of the house that maybe drives a $25 procedure,
Hmm.
but at the expense of probably talking about comprehensive care. And that's what I'm when I'm talking about data points and what, because DSOs do have they have the opportunity of stronger leadership. They have the opportunity of leveraging data more successfully. I believe that whether or not they leverage those opportunities is makes a difference. And that's an irony between, now I'm going on a soapbox. The irony between the small practice and large DSO is that they're both not really leaning into their strengths. Would you, overarching in the industry?
I would say across the board, almost on every marketing metric I could measure, I agree with that statement. I will say, so one of the things our research calls out is something we call the super practice. And we probably don't have time to jump into that topic. Very fascinating topic. But basically, these are practices that absolutely destroy everyone else in their markets when it comes to certain metrics. And an example is in our research, thousands of dental practices, the average median monthly search traffic, visits to your website as a result of search, is just under 500. For the 75th percentile, moving from the median to 70th percentile, it's 1,000. It's basically double. The super practices in those areas are doing 14,000. They're in a whole other ballgame. And so when I completely agree with your statement, I think that's true. I think there's the opportunity to level up everywhere. But what's interesting is when we see those really exceptional practices, we've yet to see one be owned by a DSO. We've seen there's some that are becoming DSOs because they're basically group practices that are growing to the point where they're becoming a DSO in their own right. Their success is driving the reclassification of the business. But that is to me another deeply fascinating topic is everybody could learn from those practices. They do some things so well that if all you did was just stop and go, they're doing this, but they're not doing this, I should take a hint from that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that statement. As somebody who I think grew practices that probably would fall under that umbrella, and then now they do not. I mean, after selling to a DSO, I think that there's probably a lot to be learned there. But like you said, it's a whole other talk show. And
Yeah.
Justin, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate you. My audience doesn't show up to hear the run of the mill stuff. So I appreciate you going along with my maybe controversial statements, or right.
Oh,
Uh,
deeply, deeply.
yeah. So thanks for being on the pod. And I also thank you for bringing a lot of knowledge and data and doing the real work for helping practices out that other marketing companies don't. So where can people go to find out more about you and Room 118?
Everybody can go to the website. That's probably the easiest way if they're curious about what we're doing and they see any value in it. Website is just basically the name. So it's the word room, ROOM dash 118.com. So hit the website. If you're interested in what we do, have questions, you can reach us there.
Thank you, Justin, so much. Appreciate it.
Dr. Laskin, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for the time.